Okay, so welcome to the second in our series of webinars on organisational readiness at Hatmill. Today we've got Linzi Parry, who's our lead consultant in organisational readiness, and me, Simon Dixon. We've already had one webinar a couple of weeks ago. We held on the 11th of May, and that was focused on what do your teams need to succeed. There's a link to the recording of that in the chat. We can also find it on LinkedIn and various other social media that we put out there. And we've also got another one coming up on the 19th of June, which is performance, the high cost of low morale. So tune into that if you can. So it's a bit of a sort of a chat and then a Q&A we've got today. So if you've got any questions, then you can pop them in the chat box. We're probably going to chat for about 20 minutes and then move into 10 minutes or so of Q&A at the end. Before we get stuck in, it's probably worth us just talking about why Hatmill are now talking about organisational readiness more so than we ever have before. And I think it's largely because in logistics projects especially, that we often focus on putting up the steel work, putting the concrete floor down, putting a system in, and then just allow people to walk into the warehouse and get on with the job. And what tends to happen is the line on the lower part of that graph in terms of productivity and performance tends to dip because people are finding their ways around the new ways of working, rather than the upper line, which is sort of what we would have liked to happen or what we might have expected to happen, but without sort of the change management and the organisational readiness put into place to get people up to speed with what's going on. Then typically you do get a dip in performance. And that's something that we've really been focusing on in the last couple of years with Linzi. So Linzi, I guess over to you. Do you want to start by talking about a little bit of an introduction in terms of what we mean by organisational readiness and what that comprises?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So as Simon said, it is about making sure that the operation is ready and hits the ground running at the point where a change is live. And that isn't just about the physical environment or the processes or the new technology that you might have had at the forefront of your project. It's about the people being able to use that technology well, to work well in that new environment. And it might have affected their role, their team. It might have affected something that they have been invested in the past in terms of a process that they've nurtured over the last 20 years. But if they are not aware of the challenges that might hit them in this new environment and their ability to problem solve in these new situations, then the chances are that's when you hit that dip in performance. And that shouldn't be unexpected. If people are really having to adopt something very different to what's used before, then problem solving in that environment is really tricky. So we sort of split this into three when we're supporting clients. We look at whether the organisation is ready and what more they can do to be ready for the change to hit. And that is generally around making sure that people know how their job is changing, what the overall organisation is looking for in terms of results, what is good going to look like once this change goes live. What will it mean in terms of how the individuals or the teams, how the leaders change what they do. And so really painting that picture of what good looks like at the beginning helps the teams and the individuals to be ready for the new environment. Having them involved in developing that vision as well can bring that sense of ownership to the fore. And again, if someone is leaning into a challenge that they've got, then the chances of them having the determination to work through it and ultimately get through to the other side and win will be really heightened. Once the organisation is prepared and knows where it's going and knows what the results are and what it's going to look like when they get there, then there is just managing that tricky bit at the point where a change goes live. And the focus here for any operation is reliability. It's the focus of an operation without change, but when you layer change in, that reliability becomes increasingly important. And that's a lot of it can be down to having the support on hand to help people through it. So that might be coaching, it might be mentoring, it's definitely training in lots of cases, but that training is not necessarily classroom based, it might be on the job. We need to be really quite open to lots of different ways to support people through the initial period of change. And then finally, instead of breathing a sigh of relief, what we'd hope to encourage through the process that we've been adopting with clients is a real focus on the results. And those results are not just a set of milestones hit, they are genuinely getting benefit from the change in the investment that you've made. And so we really need to make sure that we follow through as soon as we're hitting some level of productivity that we're expecting. How do we get this team to get the energy to move through into continuous improvement? And that's incredibly important, because quite often what happens is that sigh of relief, it's okay, and then within 6 months your solution is out of date. So really focusing on the results that you initially want, but also some longer term payback from your investment is really important. And again, that means just watching out for any resistance that there might be, and continuing to support that beyond the end of the project.
Okay.
So that, yeah.
I guess that's sort of what you want to happen. What are the components of what you actually need to do to get that?
Yeah, so I think what we really are looking for is to help organisations with 5 key steps. And those steps are really making sure that, as we've just said there, that you've genuinely got alignment on what the organisation is going to look like at the end. That would be number one. So real clarity on the vision for the future operation. The second one would be absolute clarity on the measures of success. How do you know you're done? You know, how can you sort of walk away from your investment and say, yep, you know what, that was brilliant. Is it about productivity gains or engagement levels or customer service or a new proposition? Whatever it is, be really clear on how you're going to measure that you've got there. The third thing is to look in advance at the capability of your team to deliver. And that can be the experience, but it's also the capacity. How much other change is going on in the organisation? How isolated is the change? Or how much does it have to integrate with other functions? And have you got that focus that you need to, and have you thought about this in advance to make sure that you're not hitting a wall at some point down the line where the team just have not got either the experience or, worst of all, the capacity to do it? There's in some cases nothing worse than having the capacity, than not having the capacity when you've got the capability. I know how to do it, I can absolutely see how to do it, but genuinely there aren't enough hours in the day, or my team is not big enough, and that's really very frustrating. And then the fourth one would then be being able to have a really clear way in which you are going to effectively communicate and engage with the broader organisation as well as the core team, and have the right support on hand for those people to give them the confidence and the momentum and the motivation that's going to get them right through this whole sequence of events that's on the screen at the moment. And then finally, the fifth point would be around the ownership, accountability and sponsors and their behaviours. Someone's got to own this change. Someone's got to live and breathe it. And that's both as a process of delivering, but also in the ultimate operation. Who wants this to succeed? Who's going to own it? How are their behaviours going to impact and encourage others that are involved in this? Not just on the project team or the directly affected people within the operation, but also those more broadly in terms of how it's going to integrate with the broader organisation. So how does the operation fit? What does it need from the rest of the organisation in order to enable it to work well? So that those behaviours, that leadership, that desire to sort of engage with people and genuinely take accountability for pushing things forward is an invaluable source of motivation and energy for teams.
Okay, great. Today we said we'd talk about siloed working and how it affects projects. So do you want to just start by kicking off with, I guess, what do we think of as siloed working, and how does it manifest itself? How would you spot it if you were on a project?
I think it's a good thing to think about how to spot it. I think it can be really useful to just be looking out for it. And the sorts of things that we might see, and one that perhaps lots of you have seen, is you come to the go live and you find it difficult to integrate the solution with the rest of the organization because it's been developed beautifully in its own silo, but you've not considered what other parts of the organization are going to enable it to work well once it goes live. And it can be quite normal for teams to prioritize their functional solution in a project. So one area of the warehouse particularly is looking at how they make their processes, their data, their physical environment as good as it could be. But that is sometimes at the expense of a solution that will integrate. So you always need to be thinking about beyond the boundaries of your part of the solution. So sometimes what we see is things don't integrate well. I think at a more sort of at an earlier stage, when you're starting to develop solutions, it's also, if you're really, really focused on your own agenda, but maybe not the commercial results or the customer results, then you're sometimes missing a trick in terms of not sharing the problems that you've got and asking more people to be involved. So how could we do this differently? What might be a better solution for our customers, etc. So it's not all about often the efficiency or the most beautiful solution within your area. It's about what does that ultimately mean for commercial results or for the customer. And so those one-sided solutions that are not easily integrated are definitely something to look out for. And it's also worth looking at the comms that you're doing. And are you communicating what's going on beyond your team? Or are you actually keeping it all in until such times as it's all beautifully formed and you've got the answer to share? Try sharing, quite often we don't share till we've got the answer, but try and share before the end of the project. Maybe engage the broader organisation in reviewing what you've done and contributing to some of the solutions that you're considering. And then at the point where you do go live, finance, HR, marketing, customer services, all ready for that. They know it's coming. You have reached out beyond your silo, beyond your area of expertise or your function into the broader organisation. And if that is not happening, then that is siloed working. You are developing a solution that's right for your function or your team, but who knows and who is to say that that's going to be right for the broader agenda of the organisation. So it's worth taking a step back.
I see. Okay. And if you wanted to understand, let's say you just arrived on a project, it's not going well. How do you identify if that is happening or it isn't happening? What are some of the key behaviours that you'd see amongst people in the organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think if you, as we do sometimes, you arrive on a project as sort of in its first flows, or sometimes we're in there to troubleshoot. And see how we can help it recover, then the kinds of things we'd be looking out for is how does the project team communicate? If you ask them what the shared vision and goals for the project are, do they all give you the same answer or a variation on a theme, or are they wildly different? How do they see what do they see the team as the blockers in the organisation? What is stopping them? And sometimes what you can look out for there is, are they well connected as a team? Or do they see other functions as a blocker? And what is that blocker? Is it just because you genuinely haven't told them what's going on or involved them early enough? And sometimes with those blockers, it is a brilliant idea to look not just at a sort of formal hierarchy, if you like, of people that you might communicate with, but look at some of the informal networks that are set up in the organisation, because they work brilliantly. It might be that there's I don't know, a cross-functional football team, and Fred because he's on that team, and just looking to see whether people are using those networks well, to set the project up for success. The other thing I'd look for is really how much trust there is in other parts of the organization. So do teams or individuals understand what happens upstream or downstream of their particular function? And if they're not understanding that, then they're potentially not understanding the impact that they're going to have on those areas. And so you've got to trust, you've got to collaborate, you've got to reach out to those other functions and make sure that they are understanding what you're trying to achieve, understanding that end goal. And if teams are working quite insularly, then we definitely look to help them understand that bigger picture and branch out a little bit, use the networks across the organisation, formal or informal, in order to move beyond their sort of relatively tunneled vision in some cases of what success might look like for that project.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And I guess from my experience, maybe it's just projects I run that this is the case, but it's quite normal to find people moaning about things, about stuff that's going on, and no one told me about this or whatever it might be. Probably just my bad skills. Who knows? Is it ever okay to ignore someone moaning about the project and just sort of accept that actually people don't like change, and therefore a bit of moaning is normal, and therefore you shouldn't necessarily pander to everything you hear?
I think a bit of moaning is normal, so I get that, and it's not just you, Simon. I get it on my projects too. So I think you ignore it at your peril, and I think because in that grumbling, there might be an opportunity to do something better to the benefit of the results that you're looking for. And what I mean by that in lots of ways is moaning about a situation would tend to suggest that people are disengaged in some way, not too concerned about the outcomes, really not going to be at their best, if you like, to contribute to problem solving. And certainly in that kind of dip in performance, if you've not tackled it, the chances are that they'll contribute to that dip rather than getting people out of the dip. So I don't think you can ignore the moaning. However, I think there's quite a logical set of actions to really get under the skin of it. It is about making sure that people are sure of what's expected of them at any point in time, that they have got that vision, that they've been given direction, and that they are being allowed to play to their strengths potentially. Because otherwise, if we don't tackle that, there's always resistance to change, and some people get over it in 5 minutes, other people take months. And so on that sort of scale, what we should be doing is trying to sort of shift people along that scale, making sure they're sure of their expectations. But from a disengagement perspective, it can have a huge impact. And so therefore, look at whether people are worn down by failures, by the fact that they've been working on the project for a long time, and look out for things like missed deadlines or not retaining the talent that you've got. All of those things are suggesting disengagement. So it's not just about the moaning person, it's about looking underneath to see, are the whole team exhausted? Because there'll be some that are disengaged but not prone to moaning and not speaking up. And that really does store up all kinds of problems. So if it's your usual moaner and they moan about everything, help them get over it. What do they want to see instead? What help can they be offered? How can we build their confidence to contribute? But at the same time, genuinely, I think it is really important to look out for the morale and the disengagement and help people to get over that and get back to a confident contribution and to speaking up, because it can tell you loads and hugely speed up the process. If you imagine if you've got a football team and half of them are pointing in the direction and half of them aren't, you're never going to get there. That goal is never going to go in. if you work on all the different pockets of your teams, if you address it when there is poor stability in the workforce, or when people are not speaking up, or when you can see that people are anxious, if you address those things, then you start to turn them in the right direction. Everyone's pointing towards that vision that they're all aligned behind, and know how they can contribute. It is a great feeling to know that you're winning. And of course, with any sort of change, that's what you want. You want to know that it's going to be better than it was before. And that's the role of a leader, is to genuinely paint that picture, and to listen.
Okay, great.
It is all right to tell them to be quiet if they've done it a lot, though.
Okay, good.
Direct them to their peers.
It makes me feel a lot better after what I did. So what would be a good real life example of this, Lindsay, where you've been somewhere where this is happening, and what did you do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a brilliant example is, and all of us sort of worked on multi-year programs, and it exacerbates this kind of situation. On an automation program for a multi-channel retailer, the teams had really lost a lot of confidence because the site wasn't performing well, and it hadn't been performing well for quite some time. It had been in the press, and that sort of day-to-day set of challenges was really difficult for them. They were working hard. There was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of those who'd worked in an automated site before and those who hadn't. But there wasn't often the time for that on-the-job skills transfer. There was a real push to flood the site with people, which is, of course, the opposite of what you ideally want in an automated environment. And so we've got a lot of exhausted and overwhelmed individuals at all levels, from frontline up to the management team. We were seeing a lot of rework, a lot of errors, as I say, the lack of stability in the workforce, people kind of coming and going because they just didn't feel like they were winning. And the worst thing there was the loss of valuable problem-solving knowledge that had been with the site from the beginning. So there was an urgent need to find some new ways of working that was going to shift the environment forward, and make visible progress so that people and teams could feel a real sense of pride and some successes along the way. It was never going to turn around overnight, but on a weekly basis, really focusing in on what the issues were, what the priorities were, who was available to really influence others and help us to raise awareness of what could be different. Those things were really important. And just identifying and acknowledging issues, acknowledging that people are overwhelmed, rather than just saying, oh, it'll be all right, just keep going, dig your heels in. That went a long way to helping people understand that we knew that this was hard, and we knew that it was a tricky thing to get over. So listening, breaking it down into much smaller chunks. What have we achieved this week? What is better this week than it was last week? What contribution have we noticed from you? How can we reward you for that this week? How do we give you a pat on the back for that? Recognizing, when to give training and coaching and mentoring, and when potentially to step back and congratulate people on doing that themselves, and showing that trust. And all of those things, lead to a bit more energy across the site. And we come to the silos, because each of the individual areas of the site were absolutely focused on getting their bit right, but were coming up against blockers as they went into the next part of the automation or the next chamber of the warehouse. And so, building that awareness, and actually we did it pictorially, of what happens upstream and downstream of my job. So when I do well in my job, when I focus on what I'm doing, how does that impact the success of the site as a whole, but also nearer to me, sort of up and downstream. And the other thing that we did that was really motivating was providing direct customer feedback to frontline teams at the point where things started to go well. So look at how many more customers are satisfied this week than last. That's a direct result of what you're doing. And often those sorts of reports are kept at senior level. That's something you discuss in a steering group or a board meeting, but it really means something to connect the front line to the customers. And that increased confidence to problem solve and take data-based decisions was another really important thing, that we genuinely pulled people out of the operation invested in showing them different ways of problem solving in this automated environment. And then they go back and they're, okay, so I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve now. And that engagement, that connection to the broader organization really genuinely set the site up to have quite a different feel to it. And I think the most important thing was it gave people the confidence on a day-to-day basis to realize that they were making a difference.
Okay, great. I've probably got time for one, maybe two questions, I don't know. First question I've got here is sort of, if business as usual has a silo mentality, and that's how the organization typically operates in that silo, is it realistic to think that you can make a project work with an end-to-end vision, or actually are you pushing water uphill with a fork?
It's not as easy as if it were in a connected organization. Of course it's not. But I do believe that a project team is all about change. And if you can, right at the beginning of that project, encourage a work stream, a working group, a sort of some kind of natural working party who is focused on, and their mission is to avoid silos, to avoid an isolated solution that doesn't integrate when it goes live, and genuinely work with them to say, what are the things that are stopping this? One of them will be the culture of the organization. This is not how we do things. So how, in some small way, for just this project, could that be addressed? The project's not going to take on a cultural change for the whole organization. But if you look at the risks, if you look at what will enable progress, what will enable the ultimate results from it, then that gives you the perfect in to genuinely reach out to the broader organization and say, you've got a role to play here. This will not work. We will not get the payback on the investment if we can't reach out into the broader organization. I think the other one, which is which is probably a little bit easier to do within a project team, especially if you've got a sort of a bigger project team, is to start setting, if you like, recognition, not at an individual or at an individual team level, but at an outcome level that affects more, that requires more than one team to pull together. So potentially you are not putting the teams in competition with one another to make the best individual solution, but you're looking for a bigger prize. And incentivizing in whatever way is right for that organization, I think is a good way of trying to link people to a bigger vision and getting them beyond that. I'm just making sure my bit's right. I think the final thing with that is, from a leadership perspective, encouraging that open communication and encouraging people to speak out and being really, really clear of what the end game is, and potentially calling out up front that siloed working is going to limit the potential of the project, and therefore you're going to be looking out for it and you're going to put it to a stop as soon as you see it. Okay, great. We've covered loads in the last sort of 28, 29 minutes now, Linzi. What sort of key points have you got that would summarize pretty much everything that we've covered? Yeah, there's a few. Look out for the symptoms of low morale. We've talked about them today. Really just have a look. Is the staff turnover different to what you'd expect it to be? Are people not speaking up? Are people less likely to be involved in problem solving? And try and tackle it. Don't ignore those things. They will be very visible. Second point, think about silos up front. How well is your organization networked now? How well does it need to be networked in order for your new solution to integrate well? And if you're kind of pre the project starting, then look across the organization in advance and make some friends before you need to use them in earnest. The third one is encourage people's ownership at all levels in the organization. You don't need to be a leader on an organization chart in terms of hierarchy to genuinely benefit the morale, the network, the ability to develop a fully rounded solution that integrates well. And so from a leadership perspective, if you are in a genuine leadership role, then delegate with confidence to others in your organization, encourage them to reach out to other teams, encourage them to speak up, but don't shy away from that. Give it a go. And a project environment is sometimes quite a good sort of microclimate within an organization, and a very safe environment in order to have a go with some new leaders.
Okay.
Fourth thing, think about your frontline teams and their contribution. Genuinely make them feel involved. Don't just limit it to the project team. Link right to the front of the front line of the organization. And then finally, take a long-term view on the organization's responsiveness to change. These things won't change overnight. They won't all be better as a result of a single project. But if you can see any of these symptoms, or even if you can't, decide to sort of take a step back regularly, look below the surface and see what can be done to smooth the way to the results that you want to see and in the timescales that you expected, and ignore the silos and any disengagement at your peril, because they will have an impact for both humans and on the profit. It genuinely is worth it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lindsay. That's been great. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and I hope that's been useful for your change management and organisational readiness aspects of your project. So this was the second of our series of 3. We've got a final one coming up on the 19th of June, which is performance, the high cost of low morale. So I hope you can join us for that as well. And in the meantime, take care. See you later.